So, welcome to the CultureOS Podcast. And this is where we explore how culture really works in organizations. And we're not talking about values on a poster or some of the corporate theater that often corporate culture represents. We're really looking at the systems, the sometimes invisible systems that really form the basis for your company culture. And in each episode, we're going to dig into one or more of what those subsystems are, whether that's inner OS, so how we show up, manage our nervous systems, our mindsets, collaboration OS, how we build trust, information flow, and collaboration across the organization, or maybe it's brand OS. What are the stories? What's rewarded in our organization? What conversely is penalized? And then finally, the things that sort of hold everything together, along with our ethics and purpose as an organization. So today, I am just beyond excited to welcome Dr. Karen Walch to our podcast. Karen has just a super long history of many, many accomplishments in her field, both in academia, as a emerita from Thunderbird School of Global Management, an award-winning author, collaborator, founder of the Social Intelligence Lab. The list can go on. Karen, we're just beyond privileged to have you join us today. Thank you so much for sparing a few minutes to share with us your thoughts about CultureOS.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. Looking forward to our discussion.
Karen, I haven't done you justice. Pull out 2 or 3 things about your extensive history that you think the audience should know about you within the context of this CultureOS conversation.
Well, my interest that took me to graduate school was in the concept of power. Who has power and who doesn't? And how is that actually studied? So that took me to the world of political science, which I found fascinating because the definition of power in political science is that if I have power, if I can make you do something you necessarily would not do. And a lot of that was grounded in what we might call domination or coercive power. And what I discovered through my studies and through my work working with executives all over the world is that that is an unstable source of power. It rarely gets things done, and it doesn't really assess the world of relationships. In relationships, we can have more productive power by trading things with each other, and we can create with intention a more integrative power, which is the most significant power that there is. That when we have trust, respect, and even love and care for each other, we can get amazing things done. Which then I would say, as it's kind of a bookend of that, is I came into the world of quantum negotiation. That ultimately there are unlimited potential and possibilities for all of us if we're mindful about the dynamics of power in terms of our internal power and the power to create systems that actually do use productive and integrated power.
Wow. Sounds like quite a good match that we have you on this podcast today, Karen. So here's how it's going to work. So my colleagues, Alex, Carl David, and myself, we've got some questions to ask you, Karen, if you don't mind. So we'll run through those, and we'd love to hear any additional perspectives you'd like to share. And then Alex will bring us home at the end of the podcast. And because I've got the mic, I'm going to go first. So inner operating system, this is about us being able to master our own operating system within the context of the company culture operating system. And I'm curious to get your perspective, Karen, on what are some of the concrete ways that you've seen leaders master these routines such that they show up grounded, anchored, fully, ready to play in the meetings, decisions, or team dynamics that they encounter?
I love the way that you are starting with inner OS, because organizations are run by human beings, and human beings have nervous systems, and then we create a system, a collective intelligence or a collective nervous system. So I like to start with the self, anchoring the self. And I could spend hours talking about the academic or the scholarly side of that. There's a lot of evidence that shows that this is real, that this really does matter. But here I'm going to talk it from a more applied perspective, given all of the work I've done myself and helping and coaching leaders in very difficult, disturbing situations in their work and in their life. And I often refer to it as a metaphor of an anchor. How do I anchor myself so I can be buoyant in all of the turbulence that's happening in and around me? So one of the things that I find is the key is how we show up is how we actually manage our own nervous system. And in many ways, I think of it as having clarity is our anchor. So for example, before I go into a negotiation, I just worked with somebody recently who we went through these 5 steps just very quickly. And she was applying for a CEO job. And she hadn't really thought about her thinking. She was a little nervous about it all. So she basically was thinking scarcity. I had to get this job. So we talked about how can you look and ground and get clarity on your thinking that there is more abundance. There are more opportunities for you out there. So that helped her feel more anchored. Then we talked a little bit about her feelings. She was feeling really scared. And she basically thought that things don't always happen for her. Things are negative. I don't always get this job. So we talked about her feelings. How could she be more optimistic that she has had so much history, so much to do, and she's got a lot to offer? And then we talked about physically. Did she plan for these days she's going to do this interview? Is she feeling rested? Is she been eating right? Does she have any pain, or does she have anything that's going to be extremely disturbing on the day so she can show up in a healthy way? And then we talked a lot about how does she want to show up. She wants to show up optimistic. She wants to show up in a more abundant way and a collaborative way. And she knows what her triggers are. If she feels like she's been disrespected, she tends to be more defensive and more aggressive. So she thought a lot about her behavior. And then on the last dimension is spiritual. That is, why does this experience she's going into have meaning to her? And in her life in general, what is meaningful to her? And why is this one piece of her long journey of her life of finding meaning and purpose in her work? So I like taking her example because it sounds very simple, but it was extremely powerful for her. And in the couple weeks we prepared together, I noticed that she became much more confident, much more relaxed. And I saw that she understood that she claimed her own power by just really reviewing her 5 human dimensions before she even came into the collective space or the social experience.
So just recap those 5 dimensions for our listeners, Karen.
So the first is on the thinking dimension. Am I thinking abundance or am I thinking scarcity? And that's why I love the work you all do, like in growth mindset. It's a shift in your thinking. And the next is on the psychological. How am I feeling? Am I feeling really afraid, or am I feeling optimistic that this is one opportunity I get? The next one is physical. If I'm not sleeping, if I'm not eating right, if I have some particular pain, it's not really going to be good for us if we're not prepared and rested and eating right, whatever it is for you physically. Sometimes we hold our breath too much. Just a simple physical element of don't hold your breath in the interview, right? And then on the social element, do I plan to show up defensive and aggressive, or do I plan to show up in a collaborative way? And these are micro discussions and dialogue in our mind. So it's just being mindful of what that internal dialogue is. And then the last is spiritual. And this basically is one of the most powerful that I've noticed for people to prepare for in terms of being anchored. So when they get into this turbulent situation like a buoy, they are very anchored that this, what I'm doing right now, has a sense of purpose for me. It's meaningful to me. In her case, she was going to apply to work in an organization that was going to help the elderly with transportation and housing. So that meant a lot to her. If she didn't get that job, she was going to go take another job in that field. So thinking, feeling, then physical, then our social behavior, and then the last is spiritual. That anchor and that clarity reclaims your inner power and allows you then to bring that energy in the neural system to the collective relationship or the organization. So I know we could talk about this for hours because I know that this is really one of the areas you're focusing on. Very important.
This, I love how you phrase that. And I'm also just running a little sort of thought experiment in my head as you're, as I always am, as you're talking about how that kind of dynamic scales up when we're talking about people in the very top of the C-suite, because when you bring in the responsibility and the pressure of power and needing to lead, being an executive, lead an organization, lead a team, perhaps sometimes even on the scale of thousands of people, that kind of dynamic, or remembering those anchors and being able to manage them effectively when there's so much pressure and there's not enough resilience, often becomes extremely difficult. And I'd imagine if there was a CEO in the room with us, they'd be able to say, yeah, all of that makes sense. But when the crunch time comes, that is just extremely difficult to be able to implement, to start, to even think about. There's too much pressure. I need to make decisions. I can't sit around. How do you think some of the, especially through your lens, which has been through your career, which is about power and understanding the different sort of structures and the complexities of power being wielded for good and for bad, how have you seen some of the best leaders navigate that? Because it requires some level of navigation, and clearly some people are more cut out for it than others. How do you see that?
I love that question, because a lot of my career has been, because I taught in a graduate program, MBA program, I worked with a lot of people who were individual contributors, great at being an engineer or a musician or a technical worker, and then they become a leader, they get a higher level promotion, their identity completely changes. And oftentimes that's the most difficult transition. So I really believe that there is some training, there is some coaching that's involved with moving up from being individual contributor to having a lot of responsibility and now having to manage others. I know we could poo-poo MBAs, but I do believe it is an art and a science to move from being an individual contributor to being responsible for an entire organization and employees. So first of all, I believe in that there is some education or training involved with that. And because I've worked with a lot of executives going through this process, I have found that coaching is really quite critical. And one of the themes that has come through the most often working with people who are moving into these higher levels, and I'm so lucky because I get to work with people who graduated 20 years ago that are in really high level responsible positions today, that they would say, I thought I was going to have a lot more authority and power when I got to this position. It's a myth that you actually do have that much authority. So then they really go through this process of saying, well, do I want to use my threat power? Do I want to use more productive power? Or for those who really believe in a sense of purpose and meaning and caring, how do I create a more integrative power in my culture? So first of all, I think one of the most critical keys for anybody with that much responsibility is to understand what power dynamics are. What does power mean? Power means claiming, first of all, are they doing their internal work, their inner OS? Fundamental. And this sounds crazy, but I have found that in a lot of my coaching sessions, people with really a lot of responsibility and a lot at stake, they have forgotten their spiritual dimension. Why are they even doing this? What sense of meaning does this have? And once they shift that, and then they start to talk to others in their team or their partners, they find out that they have more power with each other when they talk about their sense of purpose and meaning. I see you shaking your head because I know you know what I mean, that this just unleashes, and that's why I call it quantum, it unleashes unlimited potential for solutions in the most dire appearing situations.
Absolutely. Yeah. And speaking from my own perspective as a transformative coach, it's really about transformative leadership, meaning connecting the dots from your life, your purpose, what you're doing inside an organization, connected to your life purpose, and then you have it all connected. But
Yes.
On that, and it's also the reason why we work with growth journeys is I've been doing that myself also for leadership, and I can help them, as a private coach and help them understand, I have to change everything. But then what happens when they get back to the team that hasn't been to the retreat, hasn't had the same coach? So a question that I was thinking about is then it comes to collaboration, because if the team is not on the same alignment, it doesn't matter, you have to have them together, especially in the management C-level, to understand this. So when it comes to collaboration, and we're talking about collaboration OS, then that part of it promises more than just facilitation. It's more about actually designing trust architectures. So from your experience then, what are some of the hidden levers that you've seen that either accelerate or sabotage when it comes to collaboration across teams? Because that's really what Growth Journeys is all about. Go into the team and leverage the whole team's collective intelligence.
I'll give the short answer first, the way I've been looking at it and what I've discovered, and then we can talk about the longer answer. But the short answer is self-interest is the hidden lever. It can be the obstacle to undermine everything, and it is the key if we are going to use our power, the fuel, to get what we want to get done. So by that, I mean that, again, going back to our anchor and understanding myself on all these dimensions, am I clear about what my self-interest is? That's hard enough. However, then you're in a team and an organization that has their own self-interests. And these are neither right nor wrong, but they are what they are. And oftentimes we tend to think it's what do they want on the budget, for example. However, when you use the word hidden, I love the word hidden because that is the piece. What's hidden is the sense of being recognized. Those needs we care most about. Have I been included? Have I been recognized? Have I been, somebody provided some psychological safety for me to contribute? Those fundamental self-interested needs. And that's why I often think of, because my area is negotiation, anytime you're creating something new, anytime you're sharing limited resources or you're problem solving with others, you are in a negotiation. Pre-negotiation is critical, and that's why there's so much work on those who are in the lead. Like you say, do your work first and then be prepared. Do you understand in your pre-negotiation to the meeting or to the situation, do you know what the needs are of others in your team? And you may be surprised, we all know this, you may be surprised, you think it's one thing and it's something else. And a lot of times it's these hidden needs of recognition, of belonging, of having positivity. And I often find that those hidden needs are easy to understand, and you can just start asking questions about what is needed. And basically, the real work is in understanding the dynamics of the relationship. What do both parties need in that relationship? If you're passing a budget, for example, what do you need? And what is the nature of the relationship? Because there are mutual needs there. And we tend to start with a strategy of threat power or aggressive power. But how do we start with an integrative and productive sense of power so we can actually find our mutual needs? So the hidden lever is around understanding the mutual self-interests in that situation, which will not be obvious from the start.
Thank you. That's why they're hidden.
Right. Yes. And just because they're invisible doesn't mean that we can't see them. I love that part of the invisible world, is there's so many forces. And I think that's part of our mindfulness of an OS system is we are really going to become well-versed on the invisible forces. And there are dark forces and there are positive forces. And just neither right or wrong, it's just that we are aware of them, because we do have to know how to use pull energy to get information. And then we also need to be able to be assertive and get what we need and what we want. So we need to understand the timing. We need to understand the dynamics of how does push energy work in an integrative or productive power culture. And I guess I would just add one more thing to that is practice. That's why I have landed at the end of my career on practice. That it just takes practice to feel disturbed, feel surprised. And that's why I find the applied improv is a great way to kind of practice in a little mini session, being a little afraid, be a little self-conscious.
Yeah. But you come from practicing law. Just a side note, I guess you know about Robert Mordan, Laws of Human Nature, and everything he's written about power.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's really about that everyone has different dynamics in themselves, and you have to understand dark or light and the dynamics. Right. And as soon as you understand that, you don't judge other people. Then you can really bring up with another mindset, the positive. You could say the collective intelligence, and be empathetic and understanding without judging. But if you don't understand power dynamics, it's really hard to understand what drives them. That's my experience anyway. So
I too. Yeah, I agree. And one of my taglines I like to use is power is good, use it wisely.
We can all agree upon that. Many organizations still run on systems built for control, right? So if inner OS and collaboration OS are the antidote to that, what's the most provocative experiment you would run inside a company tomorrow to start rewiring the system, Karen?
Well, I would actually start every session with an applied improv game and debrief. So what I find in a very short period of time, and you can make this half hour, you can make it 10 minutes, you can make it an hour. I've done it in a group for a day, just using applied improv techniques. So what does that mean? That would mean that we start with some basic ground rules. We all know performance improv starts with the yes and as a ground rule, starts with embrace uncertainty, make your partner look good, build on everything that's given to you or thrown to you, and basically just spend some time talking about just some basic fun ground rules. And what I found, we can just say, just as an experiment for 15 minutes, let's just suspend all our judgment and let's just go with these ground rules. Let's imagine this is the collective and the environment we want to create for ourselves. Just for an hour, let's just relax. So the nervous system slows down a little bit. Then we play a game, let's say a yes and game, and then we stop, and then we talk about what I like about applied improv is the fact that you do debriefs. It's not just performance. Now we're going to, there's two big questions that we ask in the group. One is, what did you notice about yourself? So people will offer and say, I noticed, boy, well, I was really nervous. I looked really stupid. I didn't know what the rules were. I wish we would have had more instruction. I didn't like the way I was feeling. So that comes out, kind of exercise the nervousness and the self-consciousness. Then the next is we talk about, what did you notice about the group? And then people just are mindful of what's been going on around them. And they were paying attention, but they may not have been conscious about it. So it takes them a little while to think, I noticed other people were nervous too. And then I noticed as we did various rounds, we started having a little fun with it. And I noticed that people relaxed a little bit. So then we talk a little bit, but now how does this apply to what we're going to do today?
Then
We have a big meeting coming up, and how could this have some application to what we're going to do today? And then people will say, well, I'm going to remember the yes and rule today. So just that would be, I think, very experimental, and it's only an invitation, and even the most self-conscious can relax and just say, hey, I actually learned something today. So there's so many ways to start the process and start experimenting with things. But just from my own limited little experience, I have found that to be extremely powerful when it comes to the human nervous system and how nervous we are when we get into a social setting. It's human. So let's just accept that it's human, and let's kind of shake out the nerves a little bit.
Yeah. Really good. And I think that I used to practice some of that, like just to let people relax. When I had people that I was responsible for, I could maybe before the meeting, when they entered the door, I handed them a clown nose that they had to put on. Everyone was sitting around the table wearing a clown nose, and all of a sudden people relax. It's okay. Yeah. So those small little things that you can do that would let people relax.
exactly.
Couldn't you feel the whole, you could feel the energy, and I like it because it is an energy, that became a little more focused and a little more, like you said, it's very relaxed. You can actually feel it. It's an amazing, powerful concept.
I think you're onto something there. This is probably where we play games and so forth, but it's really like you have to be more playful, because if it's too serious, then people get tense. But the nervous system seems to relax when we see we're all humans, and we actually dare to have distance to ourselves, even though we work with really serious questions. We always start with some kind of exercises where we kind of, really make fool of, because I can make a fool of myself as a consultant or the leader or whatever, then everyone else can relax. The problem is that we play a game of power and position and blah, blah, blah. And that's it's a game, for God's sake. If you take off the mask and just be humans first and connect and the psychological safety, you build that, you're being vulnerable, talking about some subjects, then you can talk about any subject, but you have to kind of start with that human connection, I guess. Which is,
I agree.
I think play is wonderful for that, because it takes the tension immediately off. My experience.
Yeah, and more, there's all the science around that. Our brains just work better when they're relaxed, and that contagion with each other is, wow, we can get really creative. That's why I see it as being very quantum, because then you go into the field of potentiality, unlimited potential, if your brain and the collective intelligence is working together.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with you completely.
Is there something that perhaps we're still missing, because we're sitting here and we're reasonably intelligent people, and we build businesses and we work in various different ways around this particular problem, right? But why is it still a problem? What is it about the message, the delivery, the fact that it's difficult to get through? Is it about incentives, like you said, the real leverage, the fact that if you are motivated by, let's say career advancement or wanting to grow a great business, or perhaps even something more nefarious that we might never be able to speak to, wanting to just take over the world, or, whatever it might be? Is it really down to just the fact that misaligned incentives is what relegates these kinds of important conversations to the sort of the HR fun Friday afternoon scrap heap? What are we missing here? Because all this seems to make sense. And I'd imagine any reasonable person that listening would say it does make sense. So why is that not reflecting in the behavior that we see generally?
Well, I don't know. And that's why I am a student of power.
Right. Good answer.
Human beings are amazing to me. So the only way I can organize it in my mind, based on my study of power, is that because human beings are very, very diverse and there's a lot of different needs, some people react well to coercive domination power. They need the stick.
Right.
And then there's others that will work really well and be incentivized by the productive power. That is, if we can exchange with each other. So they're motivated by the carrot, that motivation. And then there's a whole other group of people that are motivated by the hug, love, respect, trust. So I've always been curious why we come from all these different perspectives about the power dynamics. I don't know the answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
But there are people who do respond to the stick. There are a lot of people, I say the majority of people will respond to the carrot. And there's a lot of us who respond with the hug. And you have a whole team mixed with those kinds of just systems. That's a cultural system. What system works with that group of people? I don't know. I'm looking to you for the answer.
My take on this is that we have our own backgrounds, depending on where you come from, culture, background, your mother, father, the system, academics or not. There's so much in the so-called program that becomes our mindset, our view of the world. Who am I in this? And if you talked about spirituality or holistic, or you work with yourself, then you can be more understanding about other people's background, and they can create a culture in the now. And then they have the power of the in-settlements, do we have really fast reporting here? The business part of everything, fast decision. Whilst we're moving into a more complex world now, we don't have time. We need to slow down and listen and really let the nervous system go down so we can be smart in together. But the problem is everyone is chasing for the quarterly reports and, I have to push this, stop, so it's really about the systems, I would say, and the culture which you were upbringing from, your own individual culture, perhaps. And sometimes I think people don't talk about these subjects. We just think we're some kind of machines going into work. But the more we have AI and other techniques, the more we have to be more humans, the more we have to open up and be vulnerable and talk about this. And voila, things move faster when we slow down first and build this coherence in a group, for instance. But it's a new way of acting, which maybe some leaders, some people are not. You can't generalize, but
right,
it's still kind of new way of working in this more holistic way of thinking about leadership and how you bring the most out of the team. My perspective.
Ironically, it's a time with so much speed and disturbance, so much turbulence. Here we are in this turbulent ocean all the time. It's even more important that we ground ourselves and that we can actually manage our own nervous system. That's why your inner OS matters. Because speaking of the dark, we talked about this before, the fear becomes a reality too much of the time. Because of the speed and because of the distractions. So that's slowing down and going back, go below the ocean, deep down to the anchor to find that stability and that calm becomes a skill today that is, I think, fundamental for getting anything done and for any levels of satisfaction that we need, whether it's material or otherwise.
Yeah, and I think, we the world of business traditionally is the world of the complicated. It's dashboards, it's figures, it's measurables, it's KPIs. It's above the line, number one. And number two, you need expertise to do it well. And I think what's changed is what you've just said, Karen, which is the complexity of the world, disruption, pace, technology. I think that's the why now for us here at CultureOS is we've gone over the tipping point, and those complicated practices that used to serve us well to a point no longer are starting to really crumble in the face of this increased complexity that we're working in. And I think it takes a brave leader, to David's point about walking away from societal conditioning of what a leader should do. And it's really those very courageous leaders who can see the complexity of the environment there and challenge themselves that there has to be a better way, would be my take on things.
I agree.
And I suppose part of what we're also talking about is like, the different definitions of what regulation could be, maybe in a company sense, in a business sense, in an organizational sense. Regulation is about parameters and rules and ensuring that those processes, for all good reasons, otherwise it falls apart. Otherwise, the value that is generated within it does not have a process where that stays repeatable. Otherwise, people have to build a new business every day they go into work. So, but then there's also a different way of seeing regulation as emotional regulation, where something has to live in circulation. It has to be worked through and ultimately kind of stabilized in a certain way. And I think we see this a lot in language, the language and how things are communicated. Not always, we are speaking generally here, but there are some, especially I suppose, organizations that have been around for a long time, and there's a sort of a traditional way of doing things. There's a language that's there to sort of not necessarily empower or embolden, but to kind of keep things the way that they need to be, because it's about ensuring that tomorrow everything's still going to be here and we're still going to keep on doing what we need to do, because that's what customers pay us to do. So there's a really, really good organizational rationale there. But when it comes to how the individual needs to regulate themselves, stay curious, stay inspired, stay motivated, it's just a different toolkit internally. And I think a lot of the time it's kind of carried in how we speak and what the language we use, language that is organizationally there to help to keep things stable, keep things regular, keep things process orientated, is the same language that in an individual keeps us neutral and kind of a little bit dead inside. So there's such a tension, isn't there? I suppose less of a good question than just a piece of thinking there, which is just, interesting to consider.
Yeah, you make me think of the concept of compliance there, because at the core of any culture built around a power dynamic is about compliance. So with the stick, it's about compliance or you get threatened or you become excluded. With the productive power or the exchange power, you're not going to get a raise if you don't comply with these rules.
Right.
And in the integrative power, of a culture of integrative power, the compliance is around my own sense of values, my own sense of integrity, and the integrity I have with the group. I get with the group. That the compliance is because I feel better. I get more done. I'm much happier and I have a lot of energy. And when we're looking at cultures, what's rewarded? Are threats rewarded? Are trades rewarded? What's expected? And then what are we doing to reinforce those pieces? It's all around the concept of compliance. And as we build a culture, what is our definition of compliance? And that's why it's often been very destructive. It's built, compliance is usually a punishment.
Yes.
But compliance is not necessarily a punishing or dark. thing, it means alignment and integrity as well.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So I find that to be an interesting question of, I don't know the answer to this, but how do we build cultures that reward and expect and reinforce compliance around integrative power?
Yes.
Or power with each other as opposed to power over each other? What kind of compliance systems do we build?
Mm.
So, I don't know.
This is a very, I just need to get in there because you said something about words first, Alex. And words has power in themselves. Again, book tips, power versus force. If we're now talking about power, that comes from the inside. That's something you can use language to empower people, but you can also use language to kind of make them be compliant. So it's really a lot of powers in words. And an authority knows this. People that go to certain management schools, they learn a certain term of, so it's really about, and I also work with teal organizations, self-organization, autonomous. They're so much, they can self-organize like the ecosystem. So it's really about context. Sometimes you talk about different type of leaders, or of course, adaptive leadership. In some context, some wants to stick, but where we're going for more complexity, self-organization, your own inner drives becomes the real value. So the more we can get more out of each individual, the more we can bring, like DDOs, development organizations that are actually helping each other to self-evolve in the work context.
Yeah.
So there's different types of powers, there's different ways. And then again, it's a very big topic, but I do think it's really comes down to context. What kind of, how long has this, they inherit a certain way of leading, they inherit several leadership, and traditional hierarchical big organizations and different cultures. I won't say any countries, but there are different ways of, So culture and power is also connected. There are huge difference from the Scandinavian countries if you look into others. So it's culture, it's different ways of understanding this. And sometimes I just think these kind of conversations, I lift off and look at it. How do we want to have it? Not the way we used to have it. That's the key that's the way.
Yeah. Right.
So interesting conversation, this one.
It is. In your experience, have you worked with a lot of leaders who know exactly the kind of culture they would like? Or are you there to really even help them define what it is, and then what their intention is, and the context, like you said? Do they even need you to help them define the context and the kind of power dynamics that this context is going to require?
I would definitely say yes, they need the help. They're not aware, or many of them at least, are not aware of why they have the culture they have. They haven't really thought about it as something being a positive force of energy that you can use. If you create the right circumstances and the right culture, you will skyrocket the results that you want if you really think about it. But it's seen as something that is very, I don't know what to call it, but fluffy and could it be monetized? So they don't bother about it.
Right.
They want KPIs, numbers. So definitely they need to be educated in what culture is and how you can actually start cultivating it.
Yeah, I think it often is delegated to the head of people. So I'm saddened to see the number of people that now have head of people and culture. And so companies where this really is done well, the CEO owns it. I was super surprised the other day. I had a conversation on LinkedIn with someone that I really respect, thought leader in this space. And it wasn't on the top 3 things that HR should talk to the CEO about. And I asked him, and he's like, that just happens once every 5 years. And I think that was just really interesting that, and I think we've seen major companies go under for, reasons that come out of nowhere, risks that come out of nowhere and destroy the company value overnight because of toxic culture. And so I think it's one of those things that if you're not constantly paying attention to it, all of a sudden you can get really surprised, not in a good way. And I think we do see some companies doing an amazing job. The question is how intentional was the design in the first place? And I think what we're trying to do here is just give colleagues a little bit more of a framework to think and experiment about what works best in their ecosystem. So one of the things that is challenging for us as we talk to people about this with more of a fixed mindset around, all right, so tell me what to do, is we're not telling people what to do. And the experimentation part, linked to Carl's last question to you, Karen, is it will differ depending on the company that you're in. And so there's not one nice, here's, the 5-point plan. And as well as I do that the cognitive complexity it takes to lead a system with all of the multivariate elements within that system, not every leader can play in that space. And so I think that's one of the reasons it's particularly challenging as well.
I agree.
Right, Alex, do you want to kind of wrap us up before we close?
Karen, as always, when we talk, we're just getting started.
Get ready.
This just feels like a little warm up. Yeah. But I know that it won't be the last time. And thank you for adding so much value to our ongoing conversation around, this important question of how can we empower organizations and individuals with a more balanced and more dynamic cultural operating system that helps them to, think as big as they can about the future. So thank you for stretching our brains and hearts as well. And look forward to one day welcoming you into one of our events that will be coming up soon. If anyone's keen to learn more about that and all the other rumblings that we have on at CultureOS, please go and check us out at culture-os.com. You can sign up for our newsletter. We also have a YouTube channel where we're regularly posting content, as well as interviews with our Gen Z participants as well. That's something that Sarah is leading the charge on, so that's really exciting. Thank you very much for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you, Karen.
Always a pleasure.
Nice perspectives. Really great conversation. Thank you.